Me llamo Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Gregory Ciotti. Gregory is a content OG, getting his start in marketing by building his own websites and then moving on to work as a consultant and freelancer for companies like Buffer and Kissmetrics back in the early 2010s, and then finally joining Help Scout as employee number 3 and marketer number 1. He then worked on content and communications at Shopify, and now is the director of content and SEO at Kapwing. In this conversation, we talked about the emerging trend of creator go-to-market strategies and how they're revolutionizing content marketing. Essentially, this is a decentralized content and brand building system led by individual voices instead of centralized brand accounts. We also covered video marketing and how it ties into existing channels and efforts like SEO, brand, customer marketing, communications, and more. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Gregory Ciotti.
I just recently joined this company, Kapwing, that's sort of like the Google Docs version of like video editing. Like it's like lightweight, snappy, but really fast, and you can get a lot of like feedback quickly too. Like it's great for iterative short videos rather than like you sit down for 8 hours and like like hard cut something.
Yeah.
And then so we just started up that work with Julia, the CEO. So I think like the creator stuff, it's like I'm hands-on with it now. Video, my belief in video obviously was a big part of my conviction to join Kapwing. Like, cause I just think like, because we're in the video space, we see video taking over the SERPs and like all this other kind of stuff going on. So yeah, just to give you some like background on that, I guess like my arc before I give like the, the like recorded story version of it or whatever.
Yeah. Could we, or do you want to redo that in the conversation, or could we use that as the starting point?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
We just keep that in and just go from here. I like that table setting.
Yeah.
Because what I got from that is actually like the video kind of interplays with that whole creator thing, the quick format, like the clips, the cut it up, like the stuff we do with this podcast after the fact. It seems like Kapwing is also helping kind of facilitate that pipeline of content. Is that?
For sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's designed for sort of like video everywhere, and like the way that video gets really done on marketing, which is like, multiple cuts, many places, reformatting, need a lot of feedback. Like don't create bottlenecks. It's all really like built around that for sure.
Nice. Let's go into video marketing, because I actually I feel like video is one of those things that I understand intuitively, but I don't when I start thinking about it more. Like, how should I be approaching video marketing as an SEO and content person? And the ways that I see it being referenced or used is like, one, from my standpoint, from a search marketer, is like the SERPs are starting to incorporate video much more often, especially around like middle funnel keywords and even bottom funnel stuff. Like if you're searching Jasper alternative or something like that, you see a lot of YouTube stuff and it's like affiliates, doing lists of like Jasper alternatives. So I feel like it's one of those things where video is almost a core part of SEO at this point. And then there's the other flip side, which is like the shorter form promotional channels like Twitter and LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, where it's like your attention is a lot shorter in nature. So like these quick video clips tend to be the things that go viral, or the things that like get attention on you a little bit more easily. So how should I be thinking about video in 2023?
Yeah, video is. So people have been saying video is having its moment for like the past decade. Mm-hmm. So like it's not groundbreaking to say like video is important, but I would say like recently there's some sort of like macro, I think, tailwinds that are just like, they're going to take people who have been sitting on the sidelines and still getting it done and doing a good job with like content and marketing broadly without much investment in video. And I think like the people from the sidelines start to jump in now, and the folks that have a bit of a head start, they start to think like video first with their content. And so a couple reasons why like I believe that. So you mentioned like the SERPs. Kapwing, obviously, so like Kapwing, for those folks who aren't familiar, is like an online video editor. And for our sort of like topics, we get really early exposure to when video has like taken over a SERP or started to like take over a SERP. Like the variations I've seen are like, number one, YouTube will not rank anything other than a YouTube video. at number one, like either for the snippet or it just sits a video at the top of the rest of the blue links, right? Like we have a number that might seem surprising to folks, again, who are like outside of our space, but it's coming. Like because we write and publish and sort of like market about video, we've seen this like way early, I think. So you'll see that where it's just like, do you want to have even a chance at number one? Like you will produce a video. You have to actually. It's kind of like taking off the table that you're just going to get the number one position without a video, either embedded or just like the video standalone performance on YouTube. And unsurprisingly, like it has to be YouTube too. Like if you want it to sort of be the standalone video performing well. But then you have kind of like SERPs where I can't think of the term, but I saw a term recently where Google had pulled out a video embedded on an Adobe page where they explained one of their features, and they had sort of like raised it up in this video section that appeared, I think it was right after the first result. And so Adobe was getting traffic like they were the second result, right? But the actual page was not performing that well. It was super short. Like Google just happened to pull up the sort of video section, the video sort of like collected videos that they sometimes do. And they featured 3 videos. 2 of them were direct YouTube links. And one of them was a link to the Adobe page with the video being able to be auto-played right to the side. And I had personally not seen that before. This might be old hat for some folks. But I was like, wow, like I kind of discovered it just through doing keyword research. And I was like, wow, it's this video that they have of the feature that's really causing them to rank, because the page otherwise doesn't seem like it's doing that well, right? It's like super short, no referring domains almost. It's on the Adobe website, so obviously it's got that edge, but the video really sort of like carried the day. And then like lastly is just sort of pay attention, especially when you're searching on mobile. Even to this day, I feel like mobile is another thing that's been like hammered home in content SEO for so long. But how many marketers have you worked with that like they publish something and like QA is just done on their desktop, or they like are looking only at the SERPs on desktop? Like, force yourself to look at the SERPs on mobile and how much video shows up there as well. I mean, you can kind of like see this in a more, I think, like data-driven way through stuff like organic video, like in GA and stuff like that. Too, like you can kind of get a better sort of like more data-informed sense of this rather than just like observationally. But I think the observation is like telling enough, just like when you're browsing for stuff on mobile, when you're searching for any kind of term that could be the how-to like aspect could be explained more easily in video, like video is showing up with I think increasing like prevalence. So you have that. You also have like, a sort of in B2B, especially a sort of push towards like individuals being the way that you introduce people into the brand's ecosystem, right? And I mean, like to me, the telltale sign of this is just like log into LinkedIn and look at your own feed and how many brand accounts are there, and it's like essentially 0. We can get into this like further, but I also think it's just like it's actually the setup, some of the operations work, getting it started can be a lot harder when you're sort of building a social program around like individual people. It can be harder to get started for sure. I actually think it's easier to get traction because I think like brand accounts are so hard to make like funny and interesting and like topic relevant and like performant for B2B. It's just like marketers, I think, almost need to have like a sit down and be like, we're just not creative enough to make this work. But for a person who's like giving advice, kind of sharing their like lived narrative, like their personal experience, like all that content is like much easier to draw from. But you have to build that in a different way. Like you have to make it about them. It does have to be like semi-personal. Like people do have to get to know you outside of just like, I think, your advice and tactics. And so video then gets another kind of like very strong +1 because video is just a great way to do that. We actually like when we think about, Julia's presence, it's like, if she's going to give you some like hard-won advice about, being a female founder or just being a startup CEO, we could probably, we're probably fine with like text and visuals and stuff like that. But if we want to give you, sort of like her lived experiences, we have to get more personal, and yes, like, photographs and stuff are a nice stand-in, but video is really like the way. Like video is the way that you do that. All the people that I feel like I guess like parasocial relationships, I don't like the baggage that has, but the people that I feel like I kind of know from the internet, where I'm like, I feel like I'm a bit in their head and I know their way of thinking and I appreciate their way of thinking. Like almost all of those folks, they do video pretty well. Because it's just so hard to like, how do I get a sense of like what they're about and really, really understand like how they approach things, either professionally or personally or whatever, if they're not using video. Like I don't usually read that much about a single person, but a 2-minute clip about something that you've like went through or like a single experience or like I've walked away with this stuff, like video just does such a better like job at that. So I think you see it on those two ends, definitely, where it's like more personal marketing demands video. And then just purely like the SERPs are just not going to let you get away with only text content for a lot of spaces anymore.
My thing with video, the question that I have is like how we operationalize it to an extent. So like the metaphor I guess I would use or analogy would be with like everybody can run an A/B test, right? Like a lot of email marketing tools have A/B testing functionality, landing page tools as well. But usually there's a team that like kind of knows how to set up A/B tests and they know how to do the statistics and they're kind of the experts in that field. And they'll either centralize it or help other teams do that. Whereas video, it doesn't seem, I don't know, at least in my experience, like I don't know if content marketers have traditionally held that skill set. So it's like, does content own video in the same way that like experimentation teams own A/B testing? Or is this something that is truly just a decentralized tool where it's like a customer marketing team can use it for their testimonials and case studies? A founder can use it personally to like build thought leadership and do public relations material. Like how does a team make sense of like who is the video expert and how, maybe take the example of your founder, like is she doing this on her own or is the content team helping her? Like, does that question make any sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I would say like, so I'm going to give a better answer than it depends. Don't worry. But I think like when you've been around, like when you've been exposed to enough companies and enough like successful plays, you do realize that like, despite the stuff that people want to sell you on, like there's usually multiple paths to like the finish line. So to give an example for Julia, she is very involved with like the content production, but we knew from the jump, like, we have to make it sort of turnkey for her. So she is involved, like showing up to record what we would, sort of set up topics and set up talking points. And then the sort of like post-production, like we would handle with our we only have a single creative producer, like one video producer. Mm-hmm. So that person would handle the final sort of like all the stuff that you have to have for social video, like subtitles, which like Kapwing makes that easy because it's like automatic, but just like the getting all the action into the single clip, right? Like cutting it down to sort of just like the substance with like a hook and thinking through that stuff. But yeah, she like provides the source material, right? In that example. When it comes to sort of like video, I think I have seen video be like individually successful when it's not sort of an extension or like a complement to another program. I think that's a lot harder personally. Learn with Shopify was like very successful at Shopify because we could start the channel by embedding videos.
What was Learn with Shopify?
Yeah. So Learn with Shopify was like, that was a video program under the content team, like within the content team. It was not on the main Shopify channel. Like we can kind of get in, I think, maybe a little bit into like what sort of happened with the main Shopify channel and Shopify Studios and some lessons we learned there. But yeah, Learn with Shopify was like a spin-off channel we started from like scratch. Connor Fife, like big shout out to him. He's sort of the supervising producer for that. But the way that we sort of like kickstarted growth was we looked at our best performing blog pages that needed a video, would have really benefited from a video. We felt like the topic would translate really well, like into a video as well. Like it would also perform well individually on sort of YouTube. And that was like a key part of like kickstarting that channel. We could see it by like where the views were coming from. Because in the early days, embedded views were over 50% of the channel's views, right? So that's an example of like video ultimately being its own standalone successful thing, but it started by being this like complement to another program, right? And a lot of folks have talked about like content atomization and just like start with something central. And then video is a really great way to take like the best bits of that and to show up on the channels, right? So I think like, I think it's possible though to do like, we're just going to grow a YouTube channel. We feel, for instance, like we don't have an established blog, or we just don't want to tie editorial to video, and we're just going to like push hard on this like standalone YouTube channel performance. I think that that's possible. I think that the legacy stuff of like most marketing teams and most companies is that like you should probably pair it with like another program to potentially get started. Like be careful of just like, it's a checkbox, obviously, like everyone's going to give you that advice. If video is just like, you just check it off and you just kind of lazily repurpose, it's going to be a problem. But I think because video takes so much more on this sort of like production side, like it takes so much more effort to just make the video, the final product, having the material, like having the interesting ideas come from somewhere else is like really, really helpful. Like Jack, our producer at Kapwing was like, the founder brand stuff, it still takes him, a lot of time to sort of like work on, but at least he doesn't have to like script the entire thing and come up with ideas and jam on ideas with other people. Right. So when the ideas are coming from somewhere else and you can just focus on making really excellent video, like that's tailored to the platform you're going to show up on, I just think it's a lot easier, right? It makes it more sustainable too.
It feels like there's almost two ways that you could tie this into existing efforts. And one is kind of boring and one is kind of exciting. And both of them can work. And one is boring because I feel like people look at demand generation as more boring and brand as more exciting. But I could see video kind of tying into both of those in different ways. So like the demand generation, this is more the playbook that we're used to. And this is just our skill set. We're kind of a growth focused SEO and content agency. But with the few clients that we've helped kind of understand video, like what we've done is we've built the blog, we've built the SEO efforts out through editorial and text-based content. And then we use those insights plus additional YouTube keyword research, which I don't know how accurate those tools are, but we'll find searches that are already kind of like coinciding with things that they want to rank for on their blog and create video content to, one, increase the distribution because then they've got YouTube as a search channel. And then two, it complements the content. So the engagement's better on the post. You double up and kind of get views on that video. It's typically just a better user experience. And that's sort of like intertwined with the SEO playbook. And then there's the brand side. And the brand side is like triggering brand POV and your unique takes and angles and trying to develop a little bit more top of mind awareness. And those would be the ones distributed via LinkedIn, if that's your core channel, via social. But I don't know. How, do you resonate with that? Does that, like, how do you guys approach the SEO intertwining?
Yeah, I think like for smaller companies, like for startups, if people, I always say, like, if people really love your product, like the best thing you can do for your brand is to get more people to use your product. So you are doing brand building. Like if you've got a great product, like getting people into the product is brand building, right? You're building brand. Yep. I understand, like with, for instance, native social that's not trying to drive any referral traffic. And you honestly, like in most cases, you honestly shouldn't. It's often like it's a trickle compared to an SEO program, like even a semi-mature one. And it's not really that impactful from what I've seen. Like what I think though, a lot of folks like leave on the table is you will get spillover, sort of like inbound leads and customers from this work if you're doing it well. Now a lot has been said on LinkedIn, like maybe this is like meta, but a lot has been written about like, self-reported attribution as just the first stopping point of like just a first thing that you can do of just literally ask people, where did you first hear about us? You have to, I think, kind of decide on like how much weight you're going to personally give attribution like that, right? Because it won't be sort of in a software tool and it's going to be really, really difficult, if not impossible, to figure out like the next steps that they took. But if you want to give some credit to just like, we may not have ever maybe gotten in front of this person at all, or we're just willing to have some like faith and confidence and do a first touch. Just literally ask people when they sign up or when they upgrade or when they become an MQL at like a really, really like high intent touch point. So don't ask for like, I think, a lot of people have beat it up on like gated content and stuff. I kind of agree. Like, I don't know if it's super worth asking people then. Like, you add extra friction to ask. Really probably want to focus on doing it for like demos and like actually contacting sales. Like, I want to talk to sales, right? And just like, if you've got a little bit of traction, see how many people say like, I saw your founder on LinkedIn or social, or I watched this, like just see what they say. That's a good place to start. Like, you don't have to overcomplicate it. It helps, again, as many people have kind of like written about this. I don't want it all claimed to sort of be the like champion of this idea, but yeah, just ask, like, get another perspective outside of like your software attribution, and just sort of see what people tell you. And then I think you can go a little bit further by then, taking it to like, well, what was like the representative like deal size for these people that said these social platforms? I think it's especially interesting if you go, I'm borrowing the term founder brand by Dave Gerhardt, just as like the building up the founder individually, right? I think that's a good term for it. But I think it's especially interesting, like if they say the CEO's presence on LinkedIn or the CEO's presence broadly, to like really look closely at the deal size of those folks coming in the door, right? Because if they beat, sort of like average deal size and stuff like that, then it's like, it starts to get interesting, because the volume that they're probably referring of like MQLs or signups or whatever your sort of like leading indicator, is, it's probably not going to be impressive, again, as like a semi-mature SEO program. Most likely not, unless you're kind of small or you haven't really invested in SEO. But if the folks coming in the door pay more, it just gets a lot more interesting, and like investing in it gets a lot easier beyond just like conviction that it's working,
I feel like that's a very nuanced take compared to what you see on LinkedIn, which is like either one of the two extremes, it's like either all like self-reported attribution, dark funnel, dark social, or it's the traditional. And I think a lot of people look at it as boring playbook of SEO, which I'm glad you didn't smack it down. You're like, no, volume's still very high there. Like, there's still a lot of value to be extracted there.
I mean, when you're at, when you're just running a program and you don't need a content pipeline for your own LinkedIn presence. I'm like cobbler's children have no shoes kind of deal, where I love helping companies and founders with this, but I'm kind of not super, super active myself. I don't need the hot takes. I just got to live day to day with like running a marketing program. So maybe everybody's more nuanced on podcasts than they are on LinkedIn.
It's funny. Yeah, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago on the podcast about that. And the person was like, one week I realized like my hot take is I don't have any hot takes. I've been just working on stuff and I don't have time. I would look at things and get a little irked for a second. Then I'm like, I don't really care about this. Like, I'm just going to go do my work. So it's like, I feel like sometimes totally appropriate to just move on and be like, let the world have their hot takes.
I think it's fair to share something when you've personally felt I've got to make a trade-off decision here. Like, I've only got so much budget and time, and like down to brass tacks, or just like you made a decision that made you a bit uncomfortable, and you made it because like you had conviction that this will work, that this is the way the world is kind of headed. I think it's fine to then say something, but like, I wish people were more honest about like where they were at. I've definitely talked to people that will like, they'll echo maybe some of the opinions I've got here on this podcast, but like the like track record, the history doesn't really back it. It's like they're a believer, but they haven't like run into the wins and the losses, and like they haven't really run a program betting on those things. You know what I'm saying? They just sort of like, they're still doing it the old way.
Game.
Yeah, they're still doing it the old way, but they believe in the new way, which is okay. But it's like, dial down maybe the takes and dial up the like experimenting with some of the stuff.
Do you ever get just like lost in the noise, like because I feel like now with ChatGPT and AI, it's like, I feel like I always oscillate between either getting caught up in it and spending half an afternoon trying to figure some workflow out with like Auto GPT, and like spending all my time trying to like work with like OpenAI's API, like I'll spend all the time thinking this is the future. And then I like flip back sometimes and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I'm just diluting my focus. Like, sometimes I just feel like I get a little lost in kind of the hype cycles with social.
That's
like
totally
there's always
fair.
New stuff.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think like for like AI as an example, Yeah, I've definitely kind of like gotten like lost in, started Hacker News or something, and then end up like 3 articles deep on the topic. But I think like practically it's maybe more interesting to just like list out like small kind of like thesis of like we kind of waste more time maybe than we need in this area, like to do this specific thing. When I really think about it, and I wonder if like, AI could sort of actually help us, and then like run just a small trial to like do that. I'll give you an example of like, I think your agency, from what I've seen, like you all mix this in really well with people's content strategies from what I've seen. But like, I'm not afraid at all to like do like tools roundups for things like blah, blah, blah alternatives or blah, blah, blah best software type stuff like that. Right. And I've always noticed like even when you're working with a decently experienced writer, like summarizing like all those like features and stuff, like it takes a lot of time, and they should be in the product. They should be trying it out, at the very least, like somewhat. Like we have our sort of standards of like what we expect you to do within a product before you can write about it for us. But some of the like, make sure you've captured all the features, make sure you've like sort of seen everything that they at least put up on the marketing site. We've tried like experiments around AI with that, which is like, how can you use AI to really sort of like digest and summarize things? Like for instance, like if you want to get a sense of like what people are saying about it, go to G2, go to Capterra, paste some of people's thoughts inside of like Chat GPT and ask Chat GPT to spit out a table that summarizes it in themes. And so you can get a very nice, like crisp, but still richly detailed sense of like, here's kind of the sentiment of like this product. And this helps me write about it when I'm doing a post that's like that, versus like literally scrolling through G2 for, the 12 different bits of software you're going to talk about. Right. So that would be an example of like using it as a way to try to speed up a process, and just come in, like not with some hard conviction. Again, it's almost like takes, but turned internally, where people have like such high conviction about like AI is going to change every single part of their workflow. And they haven't even really tried to apply it yet. So I think
a solution in search of a problem. Like I've seen this even before AI, like when I was working in experimentation, like some new piece of personalization software would come out and everybody would scramble and be like, how do we incorporate this into our strategy?
Yeah.
But they should be asking like, what problem do we have? And like, does this personalization thing help solve that? Same thing with AI. It's like your strategy shouldn't be AI first. AI should help you accomplish the strategy that you had already kind of been working on. It's like a behind the scenes thing.
Absolutely. And I know that the example I gave is like so boring, and it makes me think of that meme that's like, I am a horror beyond your comprehension. And the guy's like, write me an email. And it's like, I know the example I gave you is boring, but
that's a good example.
The whole point is like, try it with something small. Like if it can't even help you with something, like a couple of different small things that you have, like ideas that you have, you're probably not ready to incorporate it into something big. Like you're going to bet your content program on like AI produced content, but you haven't even tried to use it to like distill and like synthesize information first. That's to me, that's a rough bet. Like, I don't know if I would do that.
It's so funny you say that. There's so many companies right now who are trying to like mass generate programmatic SEO landing pages using AI, and they haven't done qualitative research with AI. It's like the small things, they're just skipping right to the fly stage, skipped over the crawl, skipped over the walk. Like, let's just go print out thousands of pages. It's like, it's so absurd to think about like that being successful.
Yeah. Or they've never run a programmatic like SEO program.
Right.
And like
so
now
they don't understand the core
because
components of what would make that successful without the artificial intelligence, without the automation. Like you need to first understand the principles of what would make that successful so you can have AI help you replicate those things.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like there's all bets are off, like longer term timeline, but I think, it's very obvious, but still needs to be said. It's like everybody should see it as an accelerant to something that's been tested and works, or to speed up tests. Right. Versus like going all in on areas where, again, you don't even know the fundamentals of like what an approach like that would look like, Yeah.
Any other interesting experiments you're running with AI?
I mean, right now it is mostly around just like, how much time do like it starts with like, exasperated sigh. How much time do we lose on this thing that's really not like a differentiator? So because because they're still all experiments, I'll keep cards to my chest right now. But no, it's mostly around that. Like I wouldn't shock you with any of it. It's mostly around like, how do we speed up production for steps that like really don't take the writer's like ingenuity and imagination to like perform, especially in the research phase. Like, big hint, like especially in the research phase, like great content really starts with like great research. It's probably at least a 50-50 split between like research and writing for really amazing pieces. And it's like, yeah, if you can just like speed through synthesizing info, it's super helpful. And then you can spend more of your time sort of like on polish. So,
you know what somebody told me when I was doing research, because I tried to ask a couple of people who have worked with you what I should be asking about. Somebody told me that one of your superpowers was in constructing a piece of content. You were very good at synthesizing information from various sources. So you would quote like Ogilvy and this piece of research here. And like, I remember seeing that in some of the articles that you would write at Help Scout, like the Psychology of Color, I think was the big one that was like ranking and, I would see pieces like that all the time. So it's funny that you mentioned that, like that was one of your superpowers that other people had noticed. And you're saying you're kind of experimenting with AI to help facilitate that process. So I'm guessing like that would take a lot of time and effort to read through the books. And I don't know, can you give me like the before and after and kind of like how you're approaching that now?
Yeah, it's like if you've ever ended up with a sort of like research doc that's like way longer than the final piece, which I absolutely have. Like, to your point, that's probably where you start with a lot of these tools, is like your own biases to like your own biases towards your own workflow, right? And so like, yeah, I think if you've ever found yourself in that situation where it's like, the research I did for this is like 20 pages and the piece ends up being like 5, because I'm linking all these things that get read but may not get used or cited, and like pulling out excerpts just like into the Google Doc because I'm a barbarian and that's how I work. I don't do like a really super tight like Notion kind of like setup or anything like that. Then like, if you work that way, it's like, imagine how much faster you could move if you can get condensed versions of the stuff, if you can get summaries of your own notes, or like get reframings of points of views that you've kind of like collected by assembling a bunch of notes. Like all of that stuff I find is like very helpful. It keeps you away from the risk of like the copyright, issues or any kind of concerns you might have with SEO, like, which I think are a bit overblown, but people still have them, right? Because it's like every single thing that we put up has like been, written by a human's hands on a keyboard, but it's like all the background stuff, all the background stuff is like open season for like AI to help you move faster. So
I love that take. A lot of what we've talked about, I feel like has cornered on like the old versus the new, the foundations versus the emerging. So before we started recording, I asked you if we could frame this as, like being sort of wise grandparents of content marketing and talking about the old days and what still applies, how things have changed. So like I mentioned, like we've been around the same kind of companies and spaces. Like I know you worked with Buffer and Kissmetrics back in the day and Help Scout especially. So I guess like a high level framing of this is, what was the playbook like back then? Like at Help Scout, what was the ideology of content marketing and how did you approach it? And you could take that just one at a time if you want, but the follow-up question is going to be, if you were starting to build the Help Scout blog in 2023, would the same playbook apply?
I would say definitively like no. I think the major change is that if you plan on sort of running like a very SEO informed sort of strategy today, I mean, I'm going to state the obvious here, but it has a lot of like second order effects. Is like the competition is just like insane. So like at Help Scout, I can give you an example of like what it was like back then. And this is like where there was upside and benefits. So it's not all benefits. It's not all like we came from an easy golden era or anything like that. But like one of the benefits was like we hardly ever even opportunity sized keywords, because like we could just like power through them. And I'm going up against like about.com and like really random unrelated sites, and Zendesk's program wasn't at the time, like wasn't nearly as SEO focused. And so they left a lot of stuff like on the table for us. So that's like one example, like how that would spill over into like how you would have to approach things today is if you were entering a space and you didn't feel like totally boxed out and you wanted to start up, spin up like a sort of search driven program, you'd have to like militantly, like rigorously, in my opinion, opportunity size things, where that could be as simple as taking like historical conversion data that you have for the blog section, really looking closely at like expected CTRs, right? Like you could start with benchmarks, but again, if you've got your own data for certain, even for like individual topics, if you've like labeled pages by like topic and stuff, like what's the expected CTR at certain positions, and like just stack rank that, like, and just basically don't break the stack rank. Like go only after the terms where it's like, okay, high conversion rate, but like lower traffic and competition. And we know, like we have some historical data that we feel like it would convert at like X. And if you can take it a step further, we could say like, you know, people who sort of come in the door from this topic, the retention rate actually looks better. Like at Shopify, we obviously had like really excellent data, and like Luke Levesque and Morgan Brown were really like critical, I think, you know, to building like a much stronger culture of data. But, you know, at Shopify, we were able to see, you know, retained active customers from certain topics. So like you could look up, you know, people who come in on pages that we've labeled as like product photography or SEO, you know, they have, we get a lot of like rack 60 from that, which for us would be like retained active customers 60 days. So people coming in the door through those topics, like their retention is stronger than folks coming in through other topics. And that was made up. That's a made up example, you know. But like that would be something where if you would take the data further, I think it's really important because it would help you chip away at getting some like early gains and not making that mistake of like, okay, we're a customer support program. We're going to go after the term customer service skills because we see Help Scout crushes it with that term. And I wrote that article 10 years ago and it has like 500 referring domains. It's like, good luck. It's like, totally. You would have to chip away at stuff. And like the way that you would do it and the way that you would find those opportunities, it's like really, really rigorous opportunity sizing and being better at data than your sort of bigger peers are. And then like the other big thing too, and it's hilarious that like there was a time when like guest posting actually drove traffic to your site, but I promise it's true. Yeah. So we did a lot of guest
unbounce and
yes.
And buffer. Yep.
Yes. We did a lot of guest posts, like actually because we would get customers. I think the long-term, like they ended up being more important longer term for people who ran the content program, like well after me, because of all those links. It probably certainly helped us in the early days too for our SEO, but we primarily did it because we actually got customers out of it. And I think nowadays, like what you would have to do differently is like, we never really invested in like proprietary, like data and data stories and really like highly linkable outside of one really crucial, sort of exception, which was like that customer service statistics, facts, quotes, kind of like page that we have. I think if you look up customer service statistics, it's probably up there. So we have that, like we had that one exception. I would go like, I think much harder on original data storytelling in the early days. If you really long-term felt like there's just too much opportunity here to not go big on sort of like search-driven content, but we've got to sort of like close the gap. We've got to sort of like exceed our competitors in link velocity, at least in the early days. You know, you can even check like how well do your competitors do on link velocity, and like make maybe, you know, the early stages of your program about kind of beating them there. If you feel like you need to close that gap, because for some spaces like customer service right now, you're probably going to compete with Help Scout on every term, like probably. And that's a compliment to the teams that came after me, more so than myself. So it's like they have a super strong domain. They've covered basically every topic. I think you would just have to play it differently than we did back then, you know?
Yeah. You have to take a different approach with your strengths in mind, and also like the huge weaknesses that you face with the company, especially in MarTech. Like I feel like MarTech at this point is so mature and kind of saturated with how we've all done SEO and content. But back in the day, it was like like what was novel was at CXL and at Help Scout was it was like these long form pieces that were well researched and like had images and like it was like very it looks almost like banal nowadays because everybody does that, and it's gotten to the point where I feel like the expected value trade-off is very different because you've got all these domains that are very strong. But then also I remember seeing a couple of years ago some articles that people were trying to outrank CXL articles. CXL articles would be like 4,000 words. And then the pieces that would try to outrank them were like 6,000. And then I'm like, well, what the fuck happens next? Like, are we all going to be writing like 10,000, 15,000 word pieces to try to rank for this keyword that we don't even know has business value? Like, what is the risk reward trade-off? What is the cost versus benefits trade-off there? And back in the day, it felt like it was a much higher reward for like pretty nominal effort. Nowadays, it's like, not only do I need a million links, but I need this piece to be skyscrapered to the point where it's like going to take a whole team's worth of effort.
Yeah. And that gets to, I think, the broader point I was making about what changed is like back in the day, we could write something of 1,000 words and get at least some early traction. And like the early traction is so important because it's like an investing strategy. It lets you like reinvest the gains into going back and updating that page later when you're starting to get beat, by articles that are, again, like, I guess the arms race probably started off at about like 1,000 words. We've gotten way bloated since then, but it's like, that's exactly my point. It's like we were able to spend less time and frankly effort to get early gains back then. And nowadays, I think like you just have to be very careful and way more sort of like rigorous about like, where do you think you can get early gains so that you can reinvest it into, competing against stuff that's probably going to take you months and many, many links and just like a lot of effort to competitively go after. So that's what was easier. Like, that's definitely what was easier. I mean, what was harder was like essentially everything else. Like the tooling was like pretty awful in comparison to kind of the data you can get nowadays, or just like the lift that it took to get some of that stuff is way harder because you didn't have all these great, like not just tools, but just like understanding. People have like well covered a lot of like content marketing analytics and data collection and analysis, right? So you're kind of like flying by the seat of your pants back then and just like relying on just like very simple setups and GA and stuff. And nowadays, like most people can up level from there without a ton of like headache. So that's definitely, I think, like the major shift. That's assuming you want to do a search driven approach though. And like, I think the other big thing that we talked about is like, if you're B2B, it's like, you might look towards social and video as the primary play, or podcasting is this like central place that you get your sort of big ideas for content that then sort of are repurposed elsewhere. So that's a huge thing. Because like when I joined Help Scout, it was like, Nick Francis and the team were looking at like Basecamp and teams that were, the content marketing was driven by great writing. And there was no question what we were going to do. There was no like, let's sit and figure out podcast, video. It was like, no, we're going to run a blog and that's what you're going to do. And it was like, and it was like, it was just default. Whereas like nowadays you actually have to make that like, which starting line do we actually start at? Like which channel?
Which game are we going to pick to play and have a chance of winning, essentially?
Yes. And I think like, the like native distribution for social media, like them prioritizing native content more so, wasn't really there. So like you could get referral traffic from social. So that's why that wasn't really like a choice. It was kind of like, well, we can publish on our blog and actually get traffic from social media. People share links and the links aren't like penalized and it's not all native content. So that was one reason, right? The platforms just weren't as big. I think a lot of people kind of forget that. It's like there actually just weren't as many people like on Twitter a decade plus ago. Like,
no one on LinkedIn like 5 years ago, or I don't know, 8 years ago was using it as a content channel.
No,
everybody just posted basically their resume on there and looked for jobs.
It was a resume archive. Like it was not anything like what you see today. So like those are other things that shaped like why blogs, like why written text, like all that stuff affected it, right? And so like again, if you're just willing to like just see things for as they are, like you still have a lot of opportunities. You don't have to default to the blog because like all these other areas have just been more fleshed out. There's way more people there. Folks that were, again, they were on like maybe the sidelines of like the customer you're after. They were on the sidelines in LinkedIn before, but now they feel like they got to be there. So you can reach them there. Like all that stuff has improved too. So
the only thing that I worry about with some of the stuff, and this is really good because we're harkening back to the point that you made on the creator go-to-market, and like everybody's a creator, individuals leading instead of brands. The only thing I worry about that in comparison with something like SEO is around the sustainability, compounding nature, and the centralization and control of the messaging too. But like, for example, you talked about Help Scout and how they've still got a bunch of traffic and like their domain's really strong. So like they've built this platform, and you built this platform where now if somebody comes in, they can still reap the rewards from that, even if they don't really do any effort, but you can still build upon that. Whereas like, for example, Amanda Natividad at SparkToro has this great following on LinkedIn and Twitter. But like, I wonder, like, what if she leaves? And like, are the efforts for SparkToro still apparent based on what she has done? Or is that something that, you have to find somebody new and maybe they don't have the same voice and like, maybe they're okay at like doing this, but it attracts a different audience. And like, how much of that stays versus how much of it has to be rebuilt constantly? Is this a sandcastle built next to the waves,
Yeah. And this I think will be like the number one biggest. Like I've already seen this question in calls with like clients where we maybe another time, or maybe we can get into this slightly, but like even questions about like someone who's doing better at this like sort of creator approach than they are at their actual day job too. Yeah. Like that's another question that kind of I've seen. But yeah, the question about like what if they leave is definitely the biggest. The cheeky first response I would give is like that same question has a really popular quote around like what happens if we train people and they leave, and like the answer is like, well, what happens if they stay? Like what happens if we don't train them and they stay? So I think when startups will see the most upside from this approach. I've kind of said that already, and I really believe that. And to the point that we were just on, it's like, what happens if you can't get traction any other way? Or what happens if you're struggling to get traction in channels where you feel really blocked out, or it's just going to take too long to get those early wins, right? Like, I think in terms of the like spillover, or I'm sorry, rather the like lasting benefits, if you have someone that's very visible for your company, they drive a lot of value for their public presence. After they leave, you still have those intangible things on the shelf. I think like you still have all that goodwill that they help you build up. You still have the customers, like the customers I don't think are leaving, right? Because a personality leaves. And if that's your foot in the door, if that's how you get that early traction to then go to more brand channels and just like reinvesting your marketing dollars, then it's hard for me to say like it's not worth it, or like that trade-off is like too scary to make, because it's like, what are your options basically? Like I saw a question like that come up again with one of the clients where someone on the sales team was doing a great job at this, and they were like, they're beating our brand accounts. Like basically they're doing better than our brand accounts. And what happens? Like they don't get a promo and they leave. And it's like, do you want to give the deals that they close back? Because you can, I guess. Do you not want the deals that they brought in during this time that they wouldn't have had if they weren't successful with it? Because it's like, that's really the question you're asking. Like, you're really asking, like, would you have traded, all the value that they sort of brought for like the safety of not, having the potential to lose them, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like, I'm not being like, this is not like rhetorical, or I'm not sort of like saying people are foolish for like asking this. Not at all. It's totally fair to be worried about this. But I think when your options are limited and you just see the way things are going, it's kind of like all marketing carries risk. And this is just like a new type of risk that we haven't really faced before, because we've just channeled all of our efforts through brand accounts in the past, right? So
my understanding here would be you can mitigate that. Well, one would be take advantage of any opportunity you have to get traction if you're early stage. Don't shy away from it just because it might go away if they leave. But the other is if you could build an underlying playbook or ideology around what we call it decentralized content. So again, if I sound like I'm playing devil's advocate, I am, because we incentivize like our team to do, LinkedIn stuff, and we're all doing LinkedIn stuff. But like to build a playbook underneath it. So it's like, if you have a salesperson who is outperforming everybody else, you also have the risk, or like they're an account executive, they could leave, your performance drops. They have this portfolio of clients. Maybe you have a non-compete, but it's like, can you enforce that? And like, there's that risk with sales teams too. But like, the hope is that you have an underlying sales process and plan that you can slot in new talent as you grow. And if the program works, you can continue to do so. So that's where I think some of this, everybody's a creator stuff. Like if you can centralize that in some way, if you can have brand POVs, if you can have like enablement or something where you could plug in other people.
Yeah.
Or just choose people who are less likely, like choose founders first. Right?
Yeah. It's a mix of like, one thing is like, if you bake it into people's like intended outcomes, and like being successful with stuff like this is part of their overall like performance review. Like, and they're rewarded for doing well. It's not a side of desk thing. I think that really helps as like a retentive kind of measure for folks that really enjoy doing this kind of work, and they would not be able to find it at a lot of other companies. Like I couldn't do this and also like the kind of day job thing, at other places, or marketers that just like believe that this is what they should be doing for social. And to your point on the like, specifically like, taking accounts with you, to me, it's more of just like a star sort of creator is more just like the risk that was always present with sales, but just like, maybe it is like a times X, right? Like times 5 or something, but it's like, people have been using tools to track like job changes, to reach out when people change jobs and stuff for like a long time, right? Like people have always tried to go get customers that they've had. So I think it's, yes, you do sort of like open yourself up to that risk to a greater degree, but the kind of like the customers and the goodwill and stuff that they brought in while they were doing it, it's like, I don't know if a ton of companies would look back and say like, we wouldn't have wanted that, versus the risk it kind of exposed us to. I suppose that we'll see. I think too, like to your point, there's a lot of other like things you can do to mitigate it. If someone's really great, have they kind of captured a playbook for everybody else to sort of follow and learn from, at the very least, like learn from, right? So that you have sort of results better distributed across your team. I think also like a great starting point is with like leadership in the company that's very likely going to stick around for a long time. Like, Shopify has no problem having folks in the office of the president for Harley Finkelstein, like run his social programs, because Harley is a long time, Shopify leader. I don't know about his future at all, but he's done a ton for the company. His presence has done a ton for the company. Like I, for instance, work a lot of times with the actual founder. So that reduces the risk like a lot if you sort of like start there and start with people for whom like, their likelihood of like leaving or taking things with them is like lowered. But yeah, to your point, I think if somebody breaks out, it's probably overall going to be a boon, especially to your company, especially as a startup. And then how do you just like replicate that success across more people versus like just letting it go, not thinking about it, and then running into that problem later where it's like, this person was great at this and we learned nothing from them, and we didn't reinvest in the brand stuff. We didn't help other people get better at this. And we sort of like bet the horse on a single person. That's the same as betting a horse on a single channel and it blowing up on you. It's like very, very similar risk. I think it's just a new flavor of it. So
yeah, there's definitely always risk. I agree with that. I have 2 more questions on the creator go-to-market. One is probably silly, and then one is more strategic and something probably a lot more people are thinking about. But the one that I have, this is not strategic or tactical at all. But so Pep Laya, my former boss at CXL, posted on Twitter like a couple of weeks ago about he's hiring a role for like a B2B marketer, and he's like, yeah, a lot of people aren't creating content on LinkedIn, and I find that sus. And I'm just like, man, a lot of people don't create content on LinkedIn. And in fact, if I didn't run an agency where you're kind of selling your expertise, right? You want to build trust and authority with yourself. I wouldn't be doing it, So I feel like, do we like, I don't think that, I don't know, maybe you don't like Facebook ads, but like, I don't think people would have an inherent problem learning the Facebook ads platform if it would help a business grow. But I feel like this fits under a different category where it's sort of like can we demand that people build a personal brand in the name of building our company's brand? Like, it just feels like a little bit like that's a much more personal thing to be inclined towards.
Yeah, it's very fair. And I had someone bring up too, like the recency of like the layoffs and how that affects like the sort of mood to do this, right? Now I'm like, from the very beginning when I've like talked about this stuff, like I just try to reinforce that I think it's like a niche approach where you're going to see some outsized winners. I don't think that this is, I mean, maybe this is actually a contrarian take to some people who are like all in on this idea, but I think this is like very hard to scale past like startup stage. I just am willing to come to you and say, like, I don't know what it looks like, right? Like, I know obviously like spokespeople, like what that looks like on the more traditional comm side. But I think this is one of those approaches that you'll see a few companies see outsized results with. And like, they don't care about the broader statistics. They just care that they found a growth lever that actually worked for them. And this is definitely, I think, going to show up that way. I also think it's way more relevant depending on like you being a fit for the company you're joining. So if you are like Lavender is a company where I love how they are all in on this. Like, they go check them out, like lavender.ai. They sort of all commit to LinkedIn, and it's like, you're dreaming probably. I don't know. I haven't gone through their application process or anything. But I think you're probably dreaming if you apply for a marketing role there and you don't have a good presence, because it's like they're communicating to you like what they're about, that they believe in this. And if you've got no experience, they're probably going to want like outside, like tons of evidence that you could actually be successful. It's probably an uphill battle. Like, if you wanted to join them, you probably would need to showcase that you could be good at this, right? I think though we're in a period right now where you're going to see a lot of like middle ground, where it's like, okay, you don't maybe have a huge presence on LinkedIn like yourself, but have you worked with founders? Have you worked with folks internally to do this? Like, what are your beliefs on this? Like, what kind of program would you build out for us if you were to join here? Like, what do you think about that? So I think you'll find this like middle ground is like open to, you're not immediately disqualified for certain companies just because like you don't have your own giant LinkedIn presence. But they might start, if they believe in it, they might start sort of asking questions about that, especially if you're a content leader coming in, right? Or in social, or just any kind of thing that's like adjacent to that. So I would say it's like, you have to kind of make your own call on your own conviction to this, because right now at this phase, you're going to have to match your conviction with a company who also believes. I like, not sure I would bet on like coming in cold to a company that is not surfacing that they kind of believe in betting on this, and then trying to be the one that like, basically builds that up from scratch when they just have a totally different, they just like totally want to bet on something else, right? That's always been a challenge with content marketing. Like, people would give you the same advice of like, don't join a marketing team that doesn't believe in content as the first content hire, which seems obvious, but it's like, you got to come into a team that like believes already. So yeah, I think that's what you'll kind of see in the interim. And then things will kind of maybe like delineate, or sort of like, you'll have this like carve out of like, any of Pep's companies, like, coming in what he believes, and you got to be that type of marketer with that kind of presence, or just otherwise don't bother. But there's going to be a lot of people in the middle ground right now. And so I think it starts with you. What do you believe? And then like the companies you're working in right now, or the companies you're approaching for a future job, what do they believe? And do you line up? Like, could you come in and get resourcing for this? Could you come in and get any buy-in at all? Or are you going to face like an uphill battle, right? So I think I would say it's two-sided, right? It's not just like companies looking at people and saying you're sus if you don't post on LinkedIn. It's also just like, do you want to hop on this train? Like, do you believe in this and want to spend time on it?
Yeah. I feel like with channels like this, especially, like, there's a lot of activation energy that's required to not only get it started, but keep it going, keep the momentum.
Yes.
So I feel like there's got to be obviously like product channel fit, right? Like, the people that you want to attract have to be there. So if the people, I mean, ostensibly LinkedIn has all sorts of professionals, but I'm sure there's certain areas that it doesn't apply to as well as MarTech and SaaS. But then if you're going to be doing this and spending a lot of time, you want to be enthusiastic about doing so. So if I hated talking to people and if I hated doing the podcast, like we wouldn't have done more than 5 episodes. Like it's such an arduous thing. Like you research, you do the whole thing. Like it's a lot of work, but I enjoy it and I'm enthusiastic about it. And that stands out too, because the people can read through when people are phoning it in. What I think so anyway. I can read it when people phone things in.
Right.
So if somebody's phoning it in on social, they probably aren't going to have the longevity required to make it successful. And people are going to read through it. It's like there's other enthusiastic people who want to be there. They want the ball. So you're not going to get the attention that would be required of success anyway.
Yes, I 100% agree. And as somebody who's finally getting the rust out and will be more present on LinkedIn too, like now that I want to spend my own time on it, I will say is like a +1 to it is like, you don't have to be funny. you can just be informative. And it's exactly to your point. It's like, I am drawn to it because I can't shitpost. I'm really not that funny in an internet context. I think like over conversation, over drinks, maybe, but it's like not as a standalone like meme kind of person. And it's like, check out how VCs like run on Twitter. It's like a mix of just like pure futuristic thought leadership and just memes. It's but on LinkedIn, skill. It's like, it's like, it is a skill. And it's like on LinkedIn though, like people get traction with like really good advice, or like, I've actually like looked at this a different way. Yeah. There's a lot of BS too. Like, I don't need another AI tools roundup, for God's sake. It's like, please
99% of people don't know how to use ChatGPT right.
Yeah. I'm going to post that and be like, I'm actually in the 99%. So unfortunately this post ends here. No, but like, so I think like matching enthusiasm, matching like what you're strong at. I'm much better, I think, as like a writer than I ever would be as like a producer, like a video producer, but also like pushing yourself outside of like, your kind of comfort zone a little bit too. Like when you start getting traction, like, could you challenge yourself to record a video and just work with somebody who can edit it for you in a nice way? Like, even if like you believe you got a, face for radio, just like push yourself to try something that is not within like your sweet spot, but get the traction first. Like, I think the theme of this podcast has been like, early wins are so important because they sort of just let you come in and like have conviction and backing to try something a little bit bigger. Don't maybe start big, dream big, but like start small. I think
this is a great way to end the podcast. Inspirational, but also tactical. I love it. What do you want to promote? Where can people find you? What are the links?
Oh yeah. So unfortunately I have to find a way to acquire the domain name Ciotti.com, but I'm Ciotti on pretty much most social. So like LinkedIn, the username is /in/Ciotti. And then my website, GregoryCiotti.com, if folks want to, read about content marketing and if you don't read enough about it already. And then obviously like my team at Kapwing, Kapwing.com. You can kind of like stay up to date on how we're sort of approaching that space. I love following like teams and companies I think are doing interesting things. So if you think that, like, obviously that our website and our social channels would be the place to check us out. And if you want to kind of see again a sort of creator GTM program in its earliest stages, Julia Enthoven on LinkedIn is our founder and CEO. All the content comes from her. It's like from the heart. I just help her sort of operationalize it. But that would be a place where you can kind of actually tag along and kind of see how we plan on building her presence up and how that goes too.
Nice. I love that we went so deep on the creator go-to-market and video. We didn't even get to explore AI to a certain extent. So maybe we'll do a part 2. Maybe by that time it'll have fully replaced ourselves. Our jobs.
There might be some people listening to this podcast that are like, finally, a break from AI. Thank you, Greg.
Oh God, yeah. Yes, 100%. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate it.